Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for taking the time to meet with us today. Today's presentation, we're going to be talking about webinars, specifically why you should consider webinars as part of your marketing arsenal, and some of the challenges you may face while doing webinars. And really, we're going to also provide some concepts on how you can get more out of your marketing activities, specifically better conversion rates, less labor, by using some of the more advanced features that we have in ActiveDEMAND as it relates to webinars. And so today's presentation, we're using GoToWebinar, so definitely ActiveDEMAND's integration with GoToWebinar is very good, and some of the things I'll be talking about today is going to be related to using GoToWebinar and using some of ActiveDEMAND's advanced features, specifically while using GoToWebinar to execute webinars. So I'll share some slides, and then I'm going to get into the back end of the system and show you some of the ways that we're using ActiveDEMAND to execute these webinars. So why webinars? Why use webinars as a marketing tool? We've been using webinars for many years, well before this company started, as well as throughout the growth of ActiveDEMAND. Webinars have definitely played a key role in as part of our marketing tools. And I think one of the main reasons is specifically when you're marketing or trying to sell products that have a longer sales cycle or a longer marketing cycle where there's some form of education during the process. I think webinars are a great tool. You get a fantastic live audience. You also get a asset after the fact that you can market. So we've always used webinars as part of our marketing tools. And I think it's a good way to build authority, right? If you are doing marketing and you have the opportunity to bring in a industry expert, and your company and the industry expert can talk about specific topics that relate to your product or service. It's the case that the industry expert often will bring in their own audience, so it sort of gets your message to a wider audience using something like this. And I think it's, if you think about when you are trying to sell a product or service, it's a great opportunity. Webinars are a great way to teach the audience what it is you're going to be doing for them. And then once the prospects become customers, webinars are a fantastic tool for teaching your customers what you are doing for them. So it sort of works on multi-levels throughout the marketing and sales funnel. And it's typically the adoption of it is really good. People really like to participate in live events like this. A lot of studies have been done on the effectiveness of webinars and the effectiveness or perceived effectiveness of webinars as a marketing tool. I think we can all agree that in the current state of things that everybody is definitely communicating more remotely, and webinars are definitely a go-to way for not just communicating business activities, but it's a case that they're definitely using them for education across the board. So it's clear, a lot of people agree that webinars are a fantastic tool for marketing. Why is it the case that not everyone's doing webinars? Well, I think it's a case that people perceive that there's a lot of work to pull off a webinar. And arguably, to do it right, there is a bit of effort to do it. But hopefully today, after today's presentation, you're going to be able to see that with ActiveDEMAND and some of the things we've done with ActiveDEMAND, you'll be able to reduce the labor significantly and bring webinars into your marketing arsenal. So how much is really involved in doing a webinar? Well, from a very high level, I think definitely we have to have a content presenter. We're going to do a bit of promotion, build some assets, do some reminders, possibly if you have time, do some surveys. And if we look at this, really the big one is a topic and content. I think this is the biggest challenge of doing a webinar. And, building a slide deck, finding a personable presenter that be willing to get in front of an audience and talk, and hopefully one that has time that aligns with that which is convenient for participants. Now, if you have a product or service and you're actively marketing it, clearly there's somebody in the company that can speak intelligently about that product or service. So it shouldn't be too hard to find somebody that can put together a slide deck and talk about one of the aspects of your product or service. Now, once you have that aligned, then really you want people to show up. That's really the intent of doing the webinar, right? We want to engage with prospects and or engage with customers. So we have to do some promotion. So the promotion pieces, clearly emails, social posts, maybe advertise it on the website, do a bit of a few pop-ups, this type of stuff. So from an assets perspective, a few landing pages, some emails, maybe if you want to get fancy, pop-ups on the website, maybe changing hero banners, this type of stuff. And then once people sign up, we want to ensure that they show up. So we're going to have to do some type of a reminder emails or maybe some type of SMS messaging, this type of stuff, or having your salespeople phoning the prospects to remind them about the event that they've registered for. Now, if we put the effort in and we've got the presenter and we've built out the assets, how do we improve our conversion rate? Well, I argue that people love doing live events like this, but quite often they don't have a time slot that aligns with what is being offered. So as a marketer, we try to find the best time possible for everybody, but you're not going to hit the nail on the head. That's the reality because people are busy and their schedules are random. So I argue the way to increase conversion rates is to offer multiple time slots, multi-session webinars. In other words, instead of just saying we're going to do this webinar Tuesday at 10 o'clock, offer a bunch of different time slots, especially if you're a global company. If your customer base is around the world, clearly you need to offer different time slots that are right for everybody. So how can I save time? Now, it seems like there's a mountain of work that needs to be done to do a webinar. And Sean, you're doing a horrible job of convincing me that webinars are a great tool with all of this stuff that I need to do. You make it sound like there's not that much work, but the reality is there's going to be a lot of work. How can I save time? Well, I think the word here is automate. And what I mean by automate is if we're doing labor, we want to ensure that we reuse that labor as much as possible. And that's the whole idea of ActiveDEMAND, is being able to reuse labor that you've done before. Now, if every time you do a webinar, it takes a ton of work to do this webinar, you're not going to be doing a lot of these webinars. But that's the concept of automation, is write once and reuse the labor. That's exactly what ActiveDEMAND is about. So if we think about a webinar, from one webinar to the next, really, regardless of all the labor and all the stuff I just talked about, what changes from one webinar to the next? So I talked about all this stuff that you have to do, but really, from one webinar to the next, what really is different? Well, if you look at all the labor I just talked about, well, clearly the time and date of the webinar is going to be different if you're doing two webinars. The audience, who you're targeting, well, that's going to change as well. The topic, right, and a little bit of verbiage about that topic. And most likely the mugshots or a couple of images. If you think about the labor, this is really all that changes. What stays the same? Well, everything else, all the landing pages, all the emails, the schedule, all of the stuff that you can reuse, right? So with ActiveDEMAND, literally you can build a recipe that takes everything that you put together for one webinar and reuse it for the next webinar and change out the few variable items. So what I'm talking about here is ActiveDEMAND's content abstraction system, or as we call it, campaign variables. It allows you to tokenize a campaign, find all of the variable components, create tokens or campaign variables as we call them, and basically take that content out of all the landing pages, the emails, pop-ups, banners, social posts, workflows, everything, and put it into a variable table. So with the variable table, we basically have all of the variable content abstracted from the entire campaign. So in essence, when we take this campaign recipe, we clone the campaign, fill in the table of values, replace a couple of images, everything is done. All the landing pages, emails, pop-ups, everything, because the content is all abstracted from the assets. Another thing that allows you to save time is, like I was talking about, multi-sessions. Why not record the first session and then play it back for the second session or the third session or the fourth session? So really, it's get it right the first time and then reuse it, right? So that even though we're adding several sessions for our webinar, the actual labor doesn't increase, right? So it reduces effort and improves the conversion rates. So another way we can save time is with ActiveDEMAND's Webinar in a Box, as we call it, which is essentially just a campaign recipe that we built that has the base assets for webinar, landing pages, the emails, a workflow for reminding people that they need to show up, and the new ActiveDEMAND webinar integration with GoToWebinar also supports multiple sessions or multi-session webinars. So as you'll see here, when I get to the back end of the system here, it's actually not a lot of labor. You're already pitching your product. It should be very easy to find somebody in the company that can put together a slide deck and talk. And then with the webinar in the box, it's a case that you should be, very effectively filling a room full of people and getting your message out to your prospects. Okay, I'm going to switch things over to GoToWebinar to sort of walk through what it looks like setting up webinars in GoToWebinar. So the first thing to do, schedule a webinar in GoToWebinar. So there are two types of webinars, or events rather. There is a live event and there is a recorded event. And we're going to be going through both of these today. But to begin with, I'm going to talk about going through or setting up a live event here. So really, for standard events, the difference between a standard and a webcast event is related to the organizer's participation in the event. So a standard event, it's the case that the organizer has to be there, he has to show up, he has to start the event, whereas with a recorded event, clearly the organizer doesn't have to be involved. So for this, we're going to start off with doing a standard event. Once we've named our event, now we're going to talk about multi-session events. So there's lots of options here. So for this demonstration, we're going to use custom. We're going to pick the time slots for each of the different events, and basically pick the time, pick the date, and then add more sessions. That's as simple as it is. Now, once we've picked our times and dates for the sessions, note that the title for the event is going to be shared by all events. So we can just click schedule and continue. So once you've created the event, really the two important aspects of this are the title and the description. Both of these are used in ActiveDEMAND as variables. So, and it's shared by all of the events. So if you make a change here, it's going to change it for all the events. And as well, like I said, you can reference these in ActiveDEMAND as variables. Now that you've set up the event, the rest of the setup for the webinar is done here. Like for example, your audio options, dial-in options, this type of stuff. But the most important part of this is really the emails, because you're going to be leveraging ActiveDEMAND's emails and landing pages to set up all of the registrations, the follow-ups, etc. So really, it's important to disable the email system in GoToWebinar, because again, you're going to be using ActiveDEMAND emails to control the brand, the landing pages, this type of stuff. So go ahead and disable them here. So you're going to want to turn off all of the follow-up emails as well, because again, this is going to be handled in ActiveDEMAND, and of course all of the reminder emails. All of that process is going to be handled by workflows, so you can control the branding, the messaging, all of this type of stuff. So if you're going to be doing surveys and polls and this type of stuff, it's actually quite useful. And note that ActiveDEMAND will pull all of this data into ActiveDEMAND onto the prospect's timeline. So it's still a useful tool, and you may be doing surveys in emails and stuff like that after, but like I said, if you're going to include them here, that data will be pulled into ActiveDEMAND automatically. Now, if you're choosing to play a video during the webinar, it's important that you upload it now, because you're not going to have this option once the event starts. Now that your sessions have been created, it's important to edit any of the additional sessions that you've created here. Because although GoToWebinar will save all of the things that you just configured, the one element that it doesn't save is the reminder email settings. So if you have multiple sessions, you need to go into each session and turn off the reminder emails, because that is not persisted across all of the different sessions. So for the multi-session setup in GoToWebinar, that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to give you a quick overview of setting up pre-recorded events in GoToWebinar. So setting up the pre-recorded events is very similar to setting up a live event. So we just go ahead and schedule the event. There's a few changes which I'll talk about here. So clearly there's a title, and now we're going to choose a pre-recorded event. So for a pre-recorded event, you're going to have the event recorded before you set up the session, because you're going to have to access and load the recording into the event. And where we get this recording is actually from the library. So we've recorded the event, we've uploaded it into the video library, and then we're going to reference this when we set up the pre-recorded event webinar. So for the pre-recorded events, same story here. You get different options about multi-session, whether you're doing it once or a bunch of times. We'll do same thing as before. We'll use custom events and reference these events in the campaign. So we select our recording from the library. Note that even though you've selected this recording, you can change it at any time after you've set up this webinar. So this is actually super useful, because you might choose to do the first event live and then record it, and then use the recording for the subsequent sessions. So you'll have to put in a placeholder recording during setup, and then once your live event is recording, replace the placeholder with your recorded event. So pretty much the rest of the setup is the same as the live multi-session event. It's a case that, again, the title, the description are extremely important. They'll be referenced in campaign variables. And as well, you have to go in and edit each of the separate sessions to disable the reminder emails, etc. Now, with regards to engaging with the participants, because there is no presenter, it's a recorded event, well, you can still do surveys, this type of stuff, but you may choose to allow people to ask questions. Now, clearly the questions aren't going to be answered live, so basically if you enable this, it's a case that once it's saved, you can go in and change the default text to better communicate what's happening to the participants. Now, all the questions are going to be associated with each of the participants, and of course, it will be uploaded automatically into ActiveDEMAND, so that your marketers can basically process these and forward them off to the salespeople or the appropriate people to answer the questions and follow up after. So that's pretty much it. Again, don't forget to go into each of the other scheduled events and make sure that the reminder emails, etc., are all shut off. Now, so there's several options here. You can create multi-session live events, multi-session recorded events, or multi-session hosted, where the host logs in and plays a video. So lots of options. Now I'm going to switch things over to ActiveDEMAND and talk about what it looks like from the ActiveDEMAND side. So for the webinars, we're going to be using the event campaign type in ActiveDEMAND. This is the one that is used, that is actually designed specifically for doing things like webinars, trade shows, etc. So we've created an event campaign type here. And really, when I went back to the labor part of the work that's required to do a webinar, really there's the promotion and there's the assets, and then there's the follow-ups and reminders. So we have our assets, which are going to be our landing pages, this type of stuff. And really the promotion, all of the promotion is done using a calendar. Right, so it's a calendar. We're setting up emails, we're setting up social posts, this type of stuff. So the promotion will have an audience, and we're targeting this audience. We're driving this audience towards the assets, which are the landing pages. And with the event campaign type, we've abstracted the follow-up and reminders and this type of stuff to a workflow. So the idea of the workflow is that really all of the reminders and follow-ups and all this type of stuff is all relative to the specific webinar that they registered for, right? So instead of the way we used to do it and the way you traditionally do it, is having individual scheduled steps or scheduled emails or any of this stuff. Really, in the event campaign type, we have a workflow, and we can abstract all of the communications to the individual workflow. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now, if we go to the assets, and really with the assets, like I said, there's going to be landing pages, there's going to be confirmation pages, this type of stuff. But I wanted to talk specifically about adding the webinar here. So basically, you come in here, add the webinar, and if you've already connected GoToWebinar to your ActiveDEMAND account, all of the upcoming live events or events that you have scheduled and are active will show up here. So basically what you do is you just pick and choose all of the scheduled events that are, in this case, all multi-session. You're going to pick multiple sessions and click this button and add the webinars to the event. Now, as far as assets go, in the landing pages, basically there's there's two new elements for forms. One of them is the webinar. The other one is the webinar multi-select. One select, one's multi-select. And really the difference between these two as form elements, this one allows you to choose one, right? Only one, and not select multiple sessions. There might be some scenarios where you'll want somebody to be able to pick multiple sessions, upcoming sessions. Like for example, if the content is going to be different between the multiple sessions, and you want them to choose live right when they see the form. So basically, you pull this element, drop it onto the form, and basically it's going to expose any of the upcoming webinars that are associated with this campaign that have been added to the campaign and that are active. So if you've disabled one of the sessions, it won't show up here. So basically, you're going to do your promotion, you're going to drive people to this landing page. They're going to choose which webinar session is right for them. Now, when they make this choice, right, now this is where the follow-up workflow comes into play. So this is the workflow that I showed you in the previous screen right here. So I'm just going into the details. So just high level is really when somebody fills out that form that I showed you on the previous page, they enter this workflow. And the whole intent of this workflow is to do your reminders, make sure that they've registered, and you follow up with them so that when it's time to show up for the webinar, that they're there. You can add SMS messaging, this type of stuff. But really, again, if you have multiple sessions, we're going to be reminding the prospect about the session that they registered for. So it's a case that this workflow triggers when they do register for the webinar. And then basically it flows through based on the webinar start time. And it's the case that you can use dynamic fields, like I mentioned, that pull data directly from the webinar description, the title, or if you're using the campaign tokens to add information to this, then really it's a case that this whole workflow will get the person into the webinar, and then if they've attended the webinar, then basically we can do the follow-up with surveys and this type of stuff. So if they attend or if they do the surveys online in the webinar, it's going to be captured, and so you can actually wait to see if they've actually attended and use this in your decisions to do, again, follow-up surveys or follow-up emails or any of this type of stuff. So really it's and what I'm showing you here is sort of an example of the webinar in the box. And really with the webinar in the box, we have a bunch of assets like the landing pages, the pre-configured workflow, some confirmation pages, this type of stuff. So it's a case that this workflow that I showed you already exists in our campaign recipe. So and again, it's the basis for doing your webinar. You still have to go in and configure webinar, do your actual promotions, change the content, and specifically look at the variable table because again, we've abstracted a bunch of the content off of the landing pages in this template and in the emails and this type of stuff. So the idea being is that you take this recipe, you clone it, you pick the date and time of, I would say, the first webinar, and then all of your promotion, all of the emails, all the landing pages will be built inside this campaign container. And then you just fill out this table of values. You go in and add the webinars that you've created in GoToWebinar, and that's it. Basically, load her up and activate, and you're off to the races. So really, hopefully, I've shown you in this whole presentation is that webinars definitely a valuable promotion tool to consider in your arsenal. And really, with the webinar in the box system that we have, we've abstracted a lot of the labor required to do a webinar. So really, the idea with the webinar in the box is that a lot of the labor is reused. Right? So if you make adjustments to this webinar, then it can become your new template for your next webinar, and you can focus more on being creative as opposed to just doing the administrivia and labor required to promote a webinar. And if you're recording the webinars and doing playback, again, you can offer multiple sessions, allow the people to choose the session that's right for them, and which would, of course, like I mentioned, improve your conversion rates on your webinar. So really, the labor for webinar now is really just getting a slide deck, getting to someone to present, record the webinar, uploading it, and you're good to go. So yeah, hopefully this gave you some insights into how you can do it and how you can reuse labor and more effectively add webinars to your promotion arsenal.